the Attorney General's office and several other people have to sign the document before we can get rid of something. We don't just throw it in the dumpster. And even at that time, there was a mechanism in place to be able to get rid of things from the museum officially, but giving it to your foster son is not one of the approved methods of disposal for us. We only get rid of something really if it's hazardous, like we had some unexploded grenades in the collection that we got rid of. We had some asbestos samples that we got rid of, but because there was just no way to keep them safe around people. So just things like that, it's very unusual that we would do that. And also we had several eyewitnesses say that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the moon rock after the fire. It was totally intact, so it didn't make sense that he had to spend all this time putting it back together. So anyway, after months of negotiations, we finally got Coleman Anderson to send us a photo. Let's see, I can't remember now where I have it. Anyway, well, that's a photo of it. He sent us a photo of it, and we looked at it. It was a pretty good photo, but we said, you know, we can't really authenticate this. You have to turn it into NASA in Houston, and they'll authenticate it, and then we'll know we have the real deal here. And so he went down to Houston and turned it into the Johnson Space Center, and when they got it, Neil Slotnick is the AG's name that helped us, and Jim Barkley too, he was the U.S. Attorney up in Anchorage. When Coleman turned it in the parking lot of the visitor center at the Johnson Space Center, the person that picked it up, Rebecca, texted this photo of it sitting on the front seat of her car, and she said, "The Eagle has landed." And I knew at that moment we had kind of won the case, because there was no way NASA was going to give it back to this guy. They really take all this stuff seriously. They have their own police force that was involved in helping to recover this, and they were offended that this fellow had tried to claim ownership of the moon rock, because they feel it was really belonged to the people of Alaska, and it was given to them by the President of the United States, and they didn't like it that this guy claimed to own it just because he put it back together, which turns out was a totally made-up story. So we eventually had like a 70-page report proving our case, and we showed that to the judge and showed it to Coleman Anderson, who gave up. He said, "Okay, well, you know, I'm not gonna challenge your ownership of it." And so at one point, about 6 months later, I got to go down to Houston to pick up the moon rock. It was a pretty happy moment for us to be able to finally, after so long, be able to turn it to the museum here in Juneau. And I got to go down to Houston, got to see the only surviving Saturn V rocket that they have on display. That's the rocket that Apollo 11 was used. I got to see the training facility for the space shuttle astronauts and got to meet some of them. And here, I think that capsule is one that they were using for training astronauts for the Mars mission. It's really quite an elaborate facility. And as we were driving through, I recognized the lunar receiving building where the moon rocks were first delivered to that loading dock right there. So I kind of went full circle. They have a facility there still that contains the moon rocks and keeps them safe. This is what it looks like today. This is all the vacuum chambers that they have the rocks in, and they still only handle them through those ports there that are covered up right at the moment. This is some of the exhibits there of some of the larger moon rocks. And this is the curators at the Space Center signing over ownership of the moon rock, and I took it off their hands and put it in my carry-on suitcase. I was trying to be really discreet about this. I didn't tell that many people it was happening, and once I left the building by myself with this priceless moon rock in my possession, I didn't want people to really pay any attention to me, so I tried to be as generic as possible. Here I am next to the rocket holding my carry-on bag. So when I got to the, I flew first to Anchorage, where they were going to do a press conference at the Alaska school. The Anchorage School District had a place where the State Board of Education wanted to do this publicity thing up in Anchorage. So I flew to Anchorage first, and I thought, well, you know, I'm just going to be by myself, and I'll get my rental car and go to the hotel, and then the press conference was the next day. But when I got there, there was like 20 uniformed members of the Anchorage Airport Police waiting for me at the top of the gate, and they all had heard that I was carrying this moon rock, and they wanted to see it. So we went to a back area in the airport, and they got to take a look at it. That was really something. And then the next day at the press conference, the U.S. Attorney, the FBI agent, Andy Walton, Jim Barkley, the U.S. Attorney, and other officials there with some of the students got to see the moon rock for the first time. So I just wanted to back up here for a minute. When I was carrying this suitcase, well, before that, when I knew I was going to pick this up, I worked out a protocol with the FBI, who helped us out with the case, to help secure it during transit to Anchorage and then back down to Juneau. And I wanted to check in with him as we made each stop at the airport, and as I traveled around with the suitcase, I wanted to check in with them so they could kind of keep tabs on me. If I went missing at some point, they'd know where to start looking. And I recognized that I had an opportunity to get a FBI code name because I wanted to like have this really cool experience. So I asked Andy to give me a code name, and he said, "Oh, okay, well, Heisman." And that he assigned me that name because the Heisman Trophy winner was just announced that day or something, and that was on his mind. So I checked in with him as Heisman, and as I got closer to Anchorage, I would say, well, the football's at the 50-yard line. That was the code for getting to the Seattle airport. And I called the suitcase the football. So anyway, I got to play that up a little bit, which was very entertaining for me, at least. I got to go on TV talking about the moon rock and everything, and the big moment was when we got to meet Buzz Aldrin. A couple months later, he was in Anchorage, and I took the moon rock back up there to be able to show it to Buzz. He was the guy who collected the moon rocks, or at least this moon rock, and so it was pretty cool to get to reunite him with the Alaska moon rock. And he had heard a little something about our efforts to get the moon rock back, so he was kind of excited too. Although when I first saw him enter the room, he walked exactly like I thought an Apollo astronaut would walk. He was like a cowboy and just kind of striding across the room, and you could tell he was like ready to do anything. If there was a spaceship there, he would hop in it and fly off in it. He was just that kind of a can-do confident guy that was the sort of guy that they wanted for the Apollo program. Somebody that, you know, grew up and in his younger days he flew fighter pilots. He was also a degree in physics, so he could plot his own route back to Earth. If they lost the binder with the instructions, he could figure out how to do it. So he's a pretty cool guy. There's a picture of him in the lunar module, and a picture of him on the moon. I'm not sure which one of the rocks is ours here, but one of those. So anyway, when I was in Houston, I got to go on a VIP tour of the facility, including the Mission Control Center where they communicated with the spaceship and where they first heard the immortal words, "The Eagle has landed." This is when they finally touched down. This is what the room looked like back in the day. I think they had ashtrays built into the computer consoles there. It was pretty strange to see that. And these are all the computing power in this whole room. You probably have on your cell phone today. But anyway, it was pretty interesting to get to see that control room, and I got to pick up the red phone and call President Nixon, or so I imagined. But anyway, it was really cool that they have kept this room pretty much the way it was from the Apollo days. And right a floor below in the same building, they have mission control for the International Space Station. So they're still using the building for that purpose. So there are, and as a curator, of course, I'm really interested in artifacts from Apollo 11, and these are a selection of artifacts now at the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum. Neil Armstrong's spacesuit, the capsule itself, and even their shaving gear. It's all cataloged into the collection there. And even the trailer that the astronauts stayed in when they got back to Earth, the space capsule splashed down in the ocean, and they were picked up by an aircraft carrier, and on board the aircraft carrier they had this quarantine trailer, and the astronauts had to go into quarantine when they got back to make sure they didn't pick up, you know, the moon flu or some kind of illness from their trip. And so they stayed in this Airstream trailer, and they met the President Nixon, but they couldn't shake his hand yet because they still might be contaminated. So he looked at him through a window in the trailer, and they have the trailer is in the Smithsonian collection. And they actually left a lot of artifacts on the moon, and there's been some work inventorying what's left up there and kind of setting it aside as a historical site. It's pretty much now the same as they left it in 1969. The footprints are still there. A lot of the artifacts are still where they left them. And this is important evidence because you may know that there's people that deny that the moon landing ever happened, that they found out that it was impossible to fly to the moon, so they made up the whole thing and filmed the moon landing on a soundstage in Hollywood, and everything was faked. But having artifacts on the moon that you can actually see with telescopes still intact, it's important evidence. So there's actually a photo of that's the lunar module sitting there on the moon, the base of it that is still there. There's other artifacts too, and even in some photos you can see the footprints of the astronauts going to different locations. So those are some of the experiments that they left on the moon. There's one that they still use. It's a laser reflector that they can shoot a laser from the Earth and up to a reflector on the moon, and then it bounces back and comes down, and they can use that to get a precise measurement of how far away the moon is from the Earth, see if there's any changes going on. The moon is pretty important to life on Earth, and if it didn't exist, it'd be a lot different. We wouldn't have tides, we wouldn't have seasons without the moon, and lots of other things there. And there's the first human footprint, which I hope will stay that way for thousands of years to come. This is from the inventory of things that they left on the moon, that someday maybe they'll have a national park there. So because of its importance, even to Alaska Natives, who, the moon was important to them too, not for scientific reasons, but in their own history, and they knew it was a significant thing, and developed stories about what it might be like. And they had the Inupiaq people had stories about shamans visiting the moon, and there is a story here about a hunter that was picked up by a giant eagle and flown to the moon. There's a drawing of it by an Eskimo artist. The Haida people down in Southeast have a story about a girl who was disrespectful to the moon. She stuck out her tongue at the moon, and the moon responded by grabbing her up and transporting her up there. And this is a artist's depiction of that. The girl she was going out to get some drinking water and had a bucket with her. And when she stuck her tongue out at the moon one night, and as she was being lifted off the ground, she grabbed onto a bush to try to hold her down to the earth, but the bush was pulled up by the roots, and so she's shown here going up to the moon with the water bucket and the fragment of the bush still in her hand. So that kind of is the last slide, and I just wanted to thank you for listening to this. I know I know you're interested in astronomy and the universe and all that, but for me the moon is a very big deal. I remember it as a kid, and it was one of the greatest honors of my life to be able to help get this moon rock back so we could have it on exhibit here and not have to say, oh, well, that was stolen from us because of this really weird thing that happened with the fire. I don't know what they could have done better other than they could have had an alternate location to be able to securely house what survived that fire. But it turned out that the previous curator who told me that was going to come back someday, she was right, and luckily I had the information about it, so we were able to fight for it in court and prove our case. So with that, does anyone have any questions or comments?
That's really cool about your code name, Steve. That's a great code.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. When I had that suitcase, it met the carry-on suitcase size, but when I was putting it away, I overheard the woman seated next to me say to her husband, what's wrong with people? Why do they have such big suitcases on the airplane and all that? And I almost felt like saying, does the name Neil Armstrong mean anything to you? Just so that she knew that, that she had the honor of sitting next to a national treasure. But it really, there's something about Apollo 11, I think that's still, for people of my generation, it's a very big deal, and I hope that you learn more about it at some point. Maybe you already do know some things about it, but the people involved with that whole program were just incredible, what they were able to pull off with it, especially with the relatively primitive technology they had to work with. And really, they had to invent the technology to be able to do this.
With slide rule.
What's that?
With the slide rule.
Yeah, that's right, with the slide rule, yeah.
They don't have any idea what it is.
Yeah, a very primitive analog computer, I guess you would call it. But yeah, so if you're interested, you could take a closer look at those moon rocks. And the Apollo 17 moon rock, we had the astronaut who collected that one, Eugene Cernan, came through Juneau 15 years ago or so, and we got a picture of him holding that moon rock. So we now have pictures of our moon rocks being held by the guys that collected them. So that was pretty neat. All right.
All right, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, at the start of your talk, you had a picture of astronauts on the moon,
Yeah.
and the stars were visible. And typically, the pictures I see are like the one you have at the end, where it's the black sky without the stars because of the contrast between the bright and the dark. And I don't know that I've ever seen one that had the stars on it before.
Let me see if I can. Oh, something just happened to my.
It was one of the first at the top.
Oh, I guess it's dead. Yeah, I guess that was. There's a lot of details from the photos that are. There's some of the moon landing deniers go through those photos with a fine-tooth comb, and they find everything they can to challenge how that proves that they were faked. But I think there's enough physical evidence to show that it actually did happen. To pull off a hoax of that magnitude, I think would be pretty difficult. All right, well, thanks again for coming by the museum, and I'd be happy to help. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up after the program.
All right, thank you so much, Steve.
Sure.